Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this forum of the 6 candidates for Palo Alto Board of Education. I'm Palo Alto Weekly Editor Jocelyn Dong, and tonight's event is being presented in conjunction with both community and school organizations. The Palo Alto Chinese Parents Club, Palo Alto Chamber of Commerce, Avenidas, Palo Alto High School's The Campanile, the Pali Voice, and Gun High School's The Oracle. And we appreciate their partnership with us. In fact, the editors of the news organizations will be joining me and weekly education reporter Elena Kadvani as panelists tonight. So I just want to welcome Adora Zhang, Ethan Huang, and Joshua Yang. You'll get to hear their questions.
I will jump in quickly for Jocelyn. So we'll hear from the student journalists in a little bit. So let me just lay out sort of how this forum is going to work tonight. First, the candidates will introduce themselves, but instead of the traditional opening statements, we've asked them to answer one of 3 questions that we provided them in advance. We hope that the questions will help reveal the qualities that they believe to be important in a school board member or that they feel best qualifies them for the position. After those statements, the questioning will begin. Jocelyn and I, assuming she gets back, will alternate with our student journalists for the first hour and a half. And then the final 30 minutes or so we'll spend on some of the wide-ranging questions that our readers have sent in to us over the past several weeks, of which there were many. So unfortunately, we will not be taking additional questions tonight. Candidates will be time limited in their responses, and a timer will be shown on the screen. So for now, let's welcome the candidates. Thank you for being here. The first candidate to speak will be Matt Nagel, followed by Karna Niesweiner. And Matt, you have 45 seconds for the first question.
Okay. This is about problem solving, the characteristic I bring. At my last school, students were using broken cell phones, old PCs, old eMacs in the computer labs, and thumb drives. So after a few weeks, I knew we had to fix this technology problem. We couldn't afford the Palo Alto system. I knew that, but we got a little bit of money. When the new iPad mini came out, it was 2012. We got an iPad for every student in the school. We got everyone an Apple TV, an HD TV later as the years went by, and we had a system. Instead of a smart board, we had something different. We did the same thing for Spanish, the same thing for music, and the bottom line is if you have a community working together and an experienced leader, you can solve these problems. I know our Palo Alto reopening plan can be better, and I hope to serve on the board to work with the community to make it better.
All right, I'm back. So thanks, that was Matt Nagel. Next up, we have Karna Niesweiner, who will be followed by Katie Causey. Karna.
Hi, as a working mother with 2 kids at Addison who studied engineering and now runs a legal team and a large budget at Cadence Design Systems, what I bring and the quality that I think that's useful is that at work and in my volunteer work and on the PAC board, I'm known as the fixer, the person that can come in and inspire teams to have better performance, who can fix outdated or broken processes by just identifying what that process is and where the gaps are, and then helping with the communication, particularly amongst various stakeholders, helping to solve relationships and get people focused on moving forward instead of letting situations stagnate. My ability to listen with empathy and communicate is really valuable.
That's great, Karna. Thanks so much. Next, we go to Katie Causey, who will be followed by Todd Collins.
If on top of global crises, you showed up to a school board forum, I just want to thank you. I want to thank the Weekly for hosting. Local politics is more important than ever. My name is Katie Causey. I've wanted to run for this seat since I was 15 because I've attended this district during crisis. Since then, I've spent my time assisting families, volunteering for nonprofits, supporting youth, and for over a year, watching every board meeting. Our families need that dedication. Preparedness is the most important quality I bring because this office only has informal onboarding. Past candidates have taken months to get their bearings or realize they can't handle the time this position takes. We can't afford that right now. I've done the work to commit to this office. My PAUSD education taught me I could lead, and that success is when we show up for each other. Thank you for showing up for us tonight.
All right, you just heard from Katie Causey. Next up is Todd Collins, followed by Jennifer DiBrianza. You're muted, Todd.
Great, thank you, everybody. I'm going to talk about achieving consensus. Actually, achieving consensus is not necessarily the right goal for a school board. We're a diverse community with strong opinions, and if your goal is to have everyone agree, you're probably not going to get much done. I think a more appropriate goal is legitimacy, that everyone accepts that a decision is well-reasoned and that all views were considered. You can do that by running a good process. Establish clear goals, which for schools almost always means what's best for kids and families. Gather stakeholder input and reliable data and share it widely. People need to see things for themselves. And finally, do the work in public as much as possible and explain your reasoning. We can't expect people to accept a decision if they can't see how it was reached. If we do this, people won't always agree, but they know they were heard and understand why a decision was made. And that's what a community deserves from its board. Thank you.
All right, that was Todd Collins. Now we have Jennifer DiBrienza, who will be followed by Jesse Ladmerak.
Thanks so much. Hi, thank you everyone for being here tonight after a very late night last night. I think the personal characteristic that I have that helps me as a board member is that I am empathetic. I'm both an educator and a district parent, so it gives me a unique perspective. The board constantly has to make decisions in which there's division, sometimes strongly held differing views. Last night is one example, but they happen all the time. I lead with my values and always work to make sure that the welfare of all students is kept in mind, but we need to make challenging decisions often. So I listen, I take all those viewpoints and I incorporate them into the data before making an informed decision. And that's really the beginning of the work, because once the decision is made, action needs to follow that heals divisions, builds trust, and moves everyone along so our kids benefit from our collective work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And our last candidate tonight is Jesse Ladmerak. Thank you.
I am a tenacious driver of results. I have spent 2 decades as general manager of my company, building consensus among members of my management team. At the same time, we are a small business and time is money. I have no patience for blame or hand-wringing or lamenting. We have to identify a problem, we have to collaborate to find a solution, and then drive the solution forward until it's fully implemented. My unique ability is the combination of these attributes. I'm pragmatic and analytical, and I cut through noise to objectively define a problem. I have the empathy, open-mindedness, and EQ necessary to build consensus around a creative solution. And I have the tenacity and focus to drive the solution through to completion. My definition of success is a culture of accountability.
Thank you. And thank you to all 6 for your introductions. It's great to start to get to know you as people. We're going to move to our questions now, starting with Elena Kadvani. Candidates, you have 45 seconds to answer each question. Elena.
Thanks, Jocelyn. And the order for this will be Todd Collins, Jennifer DiBrienza, Jesse Ladmerak, Matt Nagel, Karna Niesweiner, and Katie Kazi. We are meeting the night after another marathon school board meeting on reopening schools, which ended with the school board unanimously approving the district's plan to begin a phased reopening of elementary schools in 2 weeks. Do you support the reopening plan approved last night? And for incumbents, you can explain why you supported it. And what steps do you think the board should take to address the rift that it's created in the community? Todd, you're up first.
Thank you. That's a great question, because obviously that's an issue of real great community concern and important to the success of the school reopening. I did support the decision to move forward with the hybrid option, which as I explained last night, I thought was important because we had said that we would do it, and there were hundreds of families that had already signed up for it. So it seemed like an important thing to keep our promise to those families and provide the option. I think the number one thing I'd like to focus on is particularly building our relationship and trust with our teachers. That's essential to our success going forward. It's been a critical part of our past success, and we need to build those bridges to make sure we can continue to perform at a high level.
Thank you. Jennifer, you're up next.
Thanks. As you know, I also voted to reopen. I believe that it was really important that in the summer we were planning to reopen. in hybrid mode until we were shut down by the governor, who said we could reopen when we came off the list or came out of the purple. And we were out of the purple, and we had committed to doing that when we were able to and to implement our health and safety measures. I believe that we have a strong safety plan. I do believe that a lot of the community does not trust in that. I think right about now, I think we have about 60% of our TK through 1 that have signed up to come back in hybrid mode. So clearly a majority really did have a desire to come back. I think the hardest work we have to do is to gain the trust of the teachers. The first way to do that is by making sure all of our safety promises are in fact in place and that people feel safe every day on the job. And that's it.
Thank you, Jennifer. And now, Jessie, go ahead.
I would have voted to reopen. My reasoning is because PAUSD exists to educate kids. And while many kids are fine in distance learning, thousands are not. And these students cut across all income brackets, all abilities, all racial demographics. It is heartbreaking that so many teachers are so scared. No one should be afraid to go to work. I'm sure the childcare providers who are supporting PAUSD students with distance learning on our campuses right now are scared as well. I own a remodeling company. Half of my employees are painters and carpenters who cannot work from home, and I know they are scared. There is clearly a disconnect about safety protocols between the district and the teachers, and we have to build that trust back. I have an idea of maybe bringing in a professional mediator, not a legal mediator, but like a marriage counselor kind of mediator to try to just get people talking.
Thank you. And I know 45 seconds goes fast, but please try to stick to it as much as possible. Matt Nagel, you're up next.
Well, first of all, let's stop blaming the teachers for the trust issue. As a principal, as an administrator, that lands on us. We're the leaders of the school. School board included. So when the trust is evaporated, you have to point the finger at yourself. The PPE was a big issue. I'm still hearing at the board meeting yesterday that, oh, we've got boxes and boxes of this. But just like textbooks, those textbooks and those PPE have to be inside the classroom. And they should have been inside 4 to 6 weeks ago, and we wouldn't have this issue. This is a rush plan. I watched the board meeting. I fell asleep again. They started going into amendments and stuff like that. And I would have voted no, clearly voted no, and asked to bring back this plan, get the trust rebuilt, and then we'll open up.
Thank you, Matt. And Karna, you're up next.
I would have voted yes to reopen. I think it's critically important that we provide the education services to all of our students. I think that families expected that, families want that, and kids really need it. And I know that there's a disconnect with the teachers, but when I look at the plan and I look at what PAC, Palo Alto Community Childcare, has done with the aftercare programs that my children are in, and I see them able to implement those same safety standards safely for months since they ran summer schools, I know that it's possible. And I know that the school district is doing everything they can to put those protocols in place, and they have the materials necessary. And so I just think we need to focus on the kids and get them back in school.
Thank you, Karna. Katie, go ahead.
I would have voted no last night. If our educators don't feel safe on campus, they can't be expected to create a safe, productive learning environment for our students. The current reopening plan has educators scared for their lives. By that metric alone, it's not good enough. I don't take lightly that I'm the only candidate endorsed by the PAEA. If elected, I'll take office in December, and I want to focus on building trust, addressing immediate needs, and amplifying trying to unconventional and innovative approaches to learning. So if our immediate needs are communication, that means meeting with teachers to amplify their ideas about helping during this time because they're the ones on the ground.
Thank you, and we'll move to the second question for this section. What is your assessment of the district's relationship with the teachers union? And do you think the district should have more direct engagement and communication with teachers rather than relying on the union? And we'll go in the same order of candidates, starting with Todd Collins.
Okay. Absolutely, we should have more and better communications with our teachers. as you heard from Dr. Austin last night, there has been an intensive focus on negotiations with the union, which is both necessary and appropriate. In fact, it's required by law. He mentioned there was 65 hours of negotiation, and that's not on top of the additional dozens of hours of informal non-negotiation connections. But that's only one channel for us to communicate with teachers, because they're also our employees and our partners in delivering education. So we need to build the alternative channels to connect with teachers and incorporate them into our processes and our thinking. And I think that's what it takes. We need both, not just one channel.
Thank you, Jennifer. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we absolutely do need to improve the relationship at this point. I think Palo Alto Unified School District and PAEA and CSEA have had a long-standing, very good relationship. As you may know, I spent a lot of years in a teachers union, and I'm really grateful for the work that they do. And collective bargaining means something legally, right? And I think that over the past few months, I mean, for obvious reasons, I hear that this type of thing is happening in all districts around the state and the country, that there is tension and there is confusion. We did come to an MOU. There was an agreement over the reopening plan, but damage has been done. I have always thought of unions as a teacher, I bring it up to my union and my union brings it. But I think in this district, we need to engage directly with teachers, because I've heard a lot of parents say the teachers told us to lobby you parents to go to the board. And that's not the way it's supposed to work, but I think we have to definitely engage more to better understand what everyday teachers are thinking.
Thank you. And Jessie, go ahead.
I mean, I can only speak as an outsider because I'm not on the board, but I don't think anybody from the outside thinks that the relationship between the district and the union is very positive right now. One of the things I really am going to prioritize if I'm elected to the board is being proactive about reaching out to all the various stakeholders, students, parents, teachers, and staff. I think we're really missing a metric right now of a diverse swath of perspective. And certainly relationships with individual teachers is part of that. It takes time to build trust, and I get that. And my plan is to just keep showing up until I do, just making myself accessible, making myself someone who people can count on to listen to them and to always value what they're saying.
Thank you. Matt, you're up next.
Well, this year, 2020, I was a current member of CTA, NEA, and basically I've been teaching for the last 2 years. And so that's given me a current perspective on what it's like to be a teacher, and see decisions made by others that affect you directly. Also, as a principal, I've had to be the one to implement these decisions. Right now, judging by that 2-page letter from PAEA to the board, this relationship is broken. Doesn't mean it can't be fixed. And I think all the candidates, all of us, one of our top priorities now is going to be building a new relationship, because the old one seems to be broken pretty badly. And that includes classified and PAEA. So I look forward to rebuilding that relationship as soon as I'm in.
Thank you, Karna. Go ahead.
So I think it's very clear that the relationship with the teachers is broken at this point. And I looked to the board meeting last week where the enrichment teachers talked about how they didn't think it was safe for them to go on campus and go between the different cohorts. And then the plan updated, and now they're going to be teaching remote, except for kindergarten, on our asynchronous days. And so a really good change took place. But I don't think the forum for making those kinds of recommendations should be the open comments at a school board meeting. And so I do think we need a different channel for legitimate ideas to be raised that are smart and helpful. And we need to generate and create, and I want to generate and create those channels for teacher communication. Thank you.
Thank you. And Katie, go ahead.
I think we've really hurt our relationship with educators in the union. We need a regularly scheduled update, whether it be from the union or educators at our board meetings, as a sign of respect and communication. Educators have really fantastic ideas for this time, and during this time more than ever, we're nothing without our people on the ground. In the Great Depression, a lot of unconventional approaches were taken that became modern pillars of so many communities. Let's listen to each other and do what PAUSD does best, develop innovative ideas that are the next leading approaches.
All right, thanks, Elena. Our next questions will come from Joshua Yang, who is the editor-in-chief of the Oracle at Gunn High School. Joshua, will you introduce the order that you will be asking the candidates and also your first question?
Of course. Good evening to all candidates. The order we're going to go in for these next two questions will be Jennifer DiBrienza, Jesse Ladmirak, Matt Nagel, Karna Nieswaner, Katie Kazi, and Todd Collins. So with that being said, my first question is, this district has historically faced claims of failing to include student voices. To the district's credit, there also have been efforts made to increase student input. If elected, what new policies could you implement to further increase student voice and input in district decision-making?
Oh, good question. So yeah, when I first was running for the board, this is something I heard, and I'd like to think I worked on this over the past 4 years, and yet it's still something I think students often feel like things are happening to them and they don't have that much of a voice. As you all saw last night, the two student board members are phenomenal voices for students in our district and at the high schools. You may know that our superintendent created a superintendent student council. I don't know what he calls it, but he periodically meets with students from our two high schools. I do think that as a board representative, we are connected with different schools. And I think that not only regularly meeting with the PTAs and the principals, but also connecting with the student governments at each of those sites is a really good practice to start.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, one of my very top priorities if elected to the board is to establish student task forces at each high school that are charged with reporting to the board and bringing the voice of students. And I want to establish these in areas that have to do with the culture and climate of our schools, because students are the experts in what's going on in our schools, and we're missing the metric of their voice right now. We, as you guys all know, we survey you once a year in the spring, and we get results, and they show us some red flags, and then we survey you again in a year. And we're missing the wisdom of what's going into those surveys. Why are you responding that way? So I would like task forces in the areas of student mental wellness, of sexual assault and violence, of educational equity, some of the very intractable problems in our district.
Thank you. Matt?
Well, first of all, I do want to survey all students and families, especially our BIPOC families, our Black, Indigenous, people of color. Specifically for that, I want to find their stories and I want to report out on them. Also want to develop a confidential racial justice form. And I want to get on the ball in developing our ethnic studies response to an upcoming law. I think all the candidates will agree, this is one of the best parts of running is you get to meet a lot of young people. And I want to throw a shout out to Vote 16. Rachel Owens convinced me to endorse that effort. Also, in talking to you student journalists, as you know, I was a former journalist and I support complete freedom of the student press. And so I am responsive to all of the student input.
Thank you. Karna?
So what I heard in like everyone talking with a variety of students over this campaign is that the student board members don't necessarily represent the voices of all students, just like we have many people in the community who don't feel all their voices are represented. Now, is it surveys or is it task forces or is it just going on campus and talking to students that's the best way to get that variety of input? I think that actually the best way is to go and talk with the students and to have open forums where you have a day where, the school board member comes and says, open forum, people come talk to us, tell us what you think. I think we need to have those types of forums, both confidential, one-on-ones and greater group gatherings to hear the voices in a forum where students can feel comfortable sharing.
Thank you. Katie?
In 2017, a proposal was brought to the board that would require student input before major decisions. If that was brought back, I would support it because student input is often too little too late. It's why I wrote an op-ed supporting Vote 16 over a year ago, and why I've written letters to the board on creating student advisory committees for issues such as equity, and have supported those efforts in our community. It's why my campaign Instagram account follows over 2,000 of our students on Instagram and does Q&As with them regularly on key issues of PAUSD. I'm going to continue that practice if elected. Students are the board's primary constituency, and amplifying their voices allows us to proactively respond to problems before they arise.
Thank you. And finally, Todd.
Thank you. This is a great question. A couple of things that I've heard suggested are great ideas. For instance, we've had task forces on sexual assault and education around sexual violence at both the high schools that have been outstanding. Some of the best work I've ever seen done in the district was done by the Sexual Assault Education Task Force at Palo, I think 2 years ago, that presented to the board 2 or 3 times, and I think we were all blown away at the success and insight of their efforts. Also, on the more humble side, I think Karna mentioned this, we've had pizza days with the ASBs, where we go and basically pay for pizza to bribe students to spend time with us, a time-honored tradition. And I think those have been incredibly successful and eye-opening for all of us. And that's certainly a tradition that I would look to continue.
Thank you. All right. As a reminder, for the next question, we are keeping the same order. And my next question is, the pandemic has negatively affected the mental health of many, not least that of teens. What are the biggest shortcomings you see in current district mental health supports, and how will you specifically address such shortcomings, especially in a virtual format? Jennifer?
Sure, thanks. Well, I think we do tend to sort of pit in this district wellness against academics, that those two can't exist simultaneously, rigorous academics. And I disagree with that. I think we have to be doing the right sort of rigorous work. And I think that right now, both in the pandemic and before, the biggest challenge in my mind is that we continue to have a culture in our school that makes kids feel really stressed out. I think we have wonderful resources for kids. I think we have our wellness centers and we have our counselors. There's all kinds of supports once they're really struggling, but I don't think we focused enough on the culture itself to make sure that we stress that there isn't just one path to success, and that you don't have to get all A's, and that you don't have to be perfect all the time.
Thank you. Jesse?
In recent years, PAUSD has substantially increased funding for student wellness supports, and student use of those supports has also increased. And these are both positive developments. But at the same time, the number of kids presenting at risk and needing crisis care has also increased significantly. So what we're doing clearly isn't enough. To use a building analogy, because I'm a builder, the foundation of student mental wellness, like Ms. DeBirenza said, is the culture and climate of our schools. Wellness supports are the house that we're building on top of that foundation. We can make that house as strong as we want, but if the foundation is unstable, the house is going to be unstable. We need to stabilize that foundation. So I mentioned student task forces before. I think we need the student voice to tell us what they need. And I want to make task forces in the governance structure of the board so they don't go away when the current board goes away.
Thank you. Matt?
I like the house analogy. It was nice. As far as shortcomings, this is one area I don't think the district has a lot of shortcomings in. I think for the last 10 years, maybe 11 years since 2009, the district has made slow but steady growth, and they're understanding that student wellness is more important than academics, at least it is in my book. Principals need to reach out to parents and students. Teachers need to reach out to parents and students during this time, because all we have is a screen. They need to call them. There needs to be home visits if possible. We really need to focus on wellness. My last point is homework. Whether or not we have COVID, distance learning, or in person, that homework policy is a Ken Dauber thing, but also I've done a bunch. We need to enforce that homework policy and not do that to our children.
Thank you. Karna?
So I think that mental wellness issues are not just high school issues. With the pandemic, they've also become elementary school issues. And I think that depression and anxiety has increased at all levels. And so we really need to be concerned about all of the students. And we need to make sure the programs that have rolled out in a lot of the elementary schools of making sure every student has 5 adults that they know and they feel comfortable reaching out to are things that we have at all levels, not just at elementary. And that every student finds a group or an organization or a team or something that really inspires them and that they really connect to. Because I think building those connections for those students and helping them find a group, an organization, or people would be very, very helpful. And it would help build a better foundation.
Thank you. Katie?
Karna mentioned an important one. What she described is what's called social isolation. And those 5 adult relationships is something that I've worked on in my volunteer work over the last years. And I've worked with some of the programs PAUSD has used to address those issues. And any big cultural issue, racism, sexual assault, mental health, we can't be working on it alone. We need to make sure that our efforts are matched on the city council side as well. And the feedback I've gotten from students is that their parents have trouble finding accessible mental health care up in the community. So let's make sure that city council is also aligning with our goals. I'm running because I know what it's like to walk into your classroom at age 14 to find your classmate is gone, and then the next month another, and then the next month another. Like Karna said, I'm going to be looking for that improvement on our trusted adult relationships in our California Healthy Kids surveys, and I want to ensure our social and emotional curriculum continues to be strengthened, that it isn't just a box we check.
Thank you. And finally, Todd?
Hey, this is really critical. And my hat's off to Mr. Dauber, who I think has more than any other single person kind of changed the conversation about this in our district in the last 10 years for the better. You know, our programs, our relationship with Cassie and ACCI, our wellness centers, our anti-stigma training, our SAL programs, they're great. But really, to me, that's the third line of defense on mental health and wellness. The first line is, as Jennifer said, addressing academic culture. Academic success and mental health aren't trade-offs. They're complementary. You can't be a great learner unless you are feeling comfortable and ready to learn. Second, and I think this is critically important at this time, connections with friends and having fun. We've got to get kids back on campus, even if it's in non-academic situations, so they can connect with their friends and connect with adults other than their family, because we know that's a critical component of mental health success.
All right, thank you.
Those are great topics. Thanks, Joshua. We return for our next question to Elena Kadvani.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So for this question, the order will be Jesse, Matt, Karna, Katie, Todd, and Jennifer. There are sharp criticisms from some in the parent community that by focusing on issues like equity and mental health, the district is losing its academic rigor. Do you agree or disagree? And if elected, what would you do to ensure that the needs of both high-performing and underachieving students are met?
I disagree. I think that for me, equity is a metric like any other metric, like graduation rates or standardized test scores that tells us how successful the district is at doing its job. It is a metric that we are failing at. And so like any other metric, we need to try to make it better. You know, for decades, PAUSD has tried to close the opportunity gap by focusing on individual children through tutoring, interventions, and family supports. And these efforts, as evidenced by the most recent CAPS tests, are still not working. It's time for us to admit that we need to take a different approach. We need to treat this as a systemic issue and take steps to address the culture and climate.
Thank you. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, these aren't mutually exclusive things. As you know, I'm a big proponent of educational equity. I've dedicated my career to it, my life to it. And you know, a few of the things I've done at, for example, my last school, and we've done it here in Palo Alto, we did it in my previous school, was the Mars math test. That's very high level mathematics. And I had that for all my TK through 8th grade classrooms. And the ones who benefited the most were the more advanced students. I did the same thing with writing. We did a statewide writing competition, and you know, the ones who won once again were the most capable students, even though it was rigor provided for my struggling students. So they're not mutually exclusive. You can do educational equity and still serve everybody.
Thank you. Go ahead, Karna.
So in this situation, I think the most important thing is that we challenge and excite all students around learning. If we are not challenging students, if we are not expecting the very best of them, then we're not going to get the very best. And I think we'll continue to get what we are getting, which is an equity gap or an achievement gap. I think that we've seen in other school districts, like a rising tide raises all boats, that all students can improve if we focus on understanding where their weaknesses are. And that comes from testing and understanding and using known standards. And then, rigorously implementing whatever program we think will best address wherever the gaps are that we discover. And I think that that's just very important for us to continue to do.
Thank you, Katie.
So when I was 10, my reading level and engagement in class started to slip. So I was put in a free after-school reading program. And after a few months, my reading level and engagement in class was back on track. That's what equity is. No one is losing anything. We're just getting support to those who need it. My degree focused on intersectional approaches to schools and communities. That means creating solutions where no one is left behind because of their race, gender, ability, background, class, or orientation. The board has spent the majority of the last year drafting the PAUSD promise, which is both our district's mission statement and how we measure success in the district. Last spring, I wrote to the board asking to set a deadline to draft the equity scorecard within the PAUSD promise, how we will measure and define success related to equity, and to expand it not just to students, but how we look at curriculum, hiring, and staffing practices.
Thank you. Todd?
Hey, thanks. This is a really, I'm glad you raised this question. Here's the thing. If we can't succeed in teaching low-income and minority students, why do we think we're being especially successful at teaching the rest of the students? I think that's a fundamental question about PAUSD. We have very high test scores for a lot of our students, but it's not necessarily from the schools. It's from, it's the students and the parents contribute a significant amount to the success of the students on tests. So I really believe that by improving our ability to address all students, to address low-income students and students that we're not engaging and supporting, we're going to increase our ability to support every student in the district. And every student in the district is going to benefit from those changes. So I don't think these are competing values. I think they're complementary.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Thanks. Yeah, I don't think that these are mutually exclusive issues. I think they are very connected. Fundamentally, I think our job is to teach all students. We are a public school district, and there are standards that are set out by the state, and our primary job is to make sure every child at least reaches those standards. Because we are a well-resourced district, we offer much more beyond that, tons and tons of extracurriculars and extra challenging courses, which is great. We should, so that kids can really continue to be engaged in all places. But we aren't doing our basic job of making sure every kid understands our basic standards at each grade level. So we have a lot of work to do. And I think that primarily we need to first get back to identifying ways to engage and challenge all students, to offer rigorous and engaging activities and curriculum so that kids are showing up and thinking and making connections so that they own their learning. And I think it flows from there.
That's great. All right, so our next questions will come from Adora Zhang. Adora is the editor-in-chief of the Campanile, and the floor is all yours.
Good evening, candidates. I have two questions for both. The order will be Matt, Karna, Katie, Todd, Jennifer, and Jesse. So my first question is, in light of recent incidents, including the In Focus Pali Bachelor being censored and Verde reporters being turned away from taking photos at the scene after an armed robber ran through campus, even though the situation was deemed safe, would you be in support of the board creating and distributing policy to site administrators and teachers on the press rights of student journalists? And if not, do you have a different suggestion to ensure those press rights are protected? First up is Matt.
Well, I think I had an interview with Ethan not too long ago and some other student journalists. I can't believe we're talking about this. It's the first thing you learn in administrator school. Also, I have the advantage of having been a journalist at the Pomona Progress Bulletin, Circulation 50, now defunct. But students are allowed to report on just about anything. They have a qualified supervisor in the form of a teacher, And yeah, administration gets to take a look, but I'm really sorry that these incidents happen. And I'm happy as a board member to print up any reminder of the student rights that have gone through multiple Supreme Court decisions. This shouldn't even be a topic. You guys are allowed to report on what you want. I encourage you. Don't report on me, okay? But report to everybody else. But I encourage you 100%. You have my support.
Thank you. Next up is Karna, followed by Katie.
I'm surprised that there aren't general standards already in our school district around what we can report on and not report on in the schools. I would think that that would be part of the existing infrastructure. I'd be happy to recommend that the administration put together an appropriate set of documentation to help support the students in that way. I don't know that the board needs to do this as a resolution. I consider this part of the general operating of the school district and something that the school district should be aware of and understand. And I would like to hear from the administration why, if there is a gap in understanding about what students could do, why that gap exists, and what we can do to get rid of that gap in the future.
Thank you. Next up is Katie, followed by Todd.
As a former Campanile staff photographer, founding arts editor of Proof Magazine, former editor-in-chief of Proof Magazine, former photographer and photo editor of the George Washington University Hazard, yes, I would support anything for the student press.
Thank you. Next up is Todd, followed by Jennifer.
Hey, thank you. California has particularly broad legislation that protects the First Amendment rights of student newspapers. They are unequivocal and they are written. You can read it. It's in one paragraph of the Ed Code. It's so broad it doesn't require elaboration. So that's the law, and we're absolutely going to follow it. And to the extent we don't, we need to educate our administrators. I do want to push back a little. I don't think many people know about the Pali Bachelor incident, and this is not the time to go into the details. That was an incident that I think it's unclear that it was reporting. It was a parody video done on a student TV show. It did include gender roles that certainly made me feel very uncomfortable watching it. And so the board wasn't involved in that, but it definitely made me uncomfortable, and it was not clear to me that it was journalism.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer, followed by Jesse.
Yeah, thanks. I think that student press rights obviously need to be protected, as Mr. Collins mentioned. The state law tells us that, but I think that student journalism is such an opportunity for learning. One of these things I talked about, engaging and challenging all students. There are so many ways that students learn so much from participating in journalism. And sometimes you guys might get it wrong, and that's okay. That's why you're in school, to learn this, right? And you have a teacher advisor and whatnot. So I am not at all interested in censoring the work that you do. And if mistakes are made along the way, hopefully that's the feedback you're going to get. And whether you're going to become a journalist or not, it's just a way to learn how to communicate and see different perspectives and report objectively. And I think that our journalism program is a really strong one, and I am very protective of it.
Thank you. Last up is Jesse.
Yes, I would support that. It's probably not legally necessary in our state, but even so, anything that we can do to re-emphasize our support of student press rights, I would be in support of. Mr. Collins mentioned the RISE task force a little while ago, and I just want to remind everybody, let's not forget that the Office of Civil Rights investigation into Title IX violations that ultimately gave rise to the RISE task force was a direct result of student reporting. So sure, you guys might make mistakes, but you also know what's going on in your schools, and you can help hold all of us accountable, and we will be better for it.
Thank you. My next question is, can you elaborate on what you think the board's standard practice should be in dealing with topics students in particular bring to the table at open forum? First up is Matt, followed by Karna.
Well, if you bring them up at open forum, board members cannot respond to them. And I noticed yesterday's meeting and a couple of meetings, certain board members are responding to them. They shouldn't do that. That's poor practice. Through your two board representatives, though, you should be funneling agenda items through them and they should be able to meet with the board president and the superintendent to get these agenda items on the board. If that's not happening, that would change if I were elected. I would be happy to meet with any student and consider their board agenda item and funnel it over to the board president and superintendent. But you do have 2 student representatives for that purpose, but not open forum. Open forum, nobody can respond to it and nobody should.
Thank you. Next up is Karna, followed by Katie.
So I believe the open forum is a great opportunity for people to share their voices, but it's not an interactive opportunity. I think it is important that people share their voices, they send their emails to the board members, they work with their board representatives. But I know some people feel like, or some students feel like their board representatives aren't always representing their positions or their views. You can always reach out to the board members and say, hey, I think this is missing. Maybe at one of our task forces or one of our pizza parties, but also, you know, you should be raising those issues so that they can become agenda items if it's something that really needs to be decided by the board. But it's not, the open forum is not the right place to get feedback or insight from the board itself.
Thank you. Next up is Katie, followed by Todd.
I think that I think one thing I'm interested in is that we traditionally don't give students time limits when they speak at board meetings, and I'm confused if that's a practice we're still doing in light of the pandemic, because I haven't seen that practice used. And I think it's really important to give students more time to speak, because as I've said right now, they are, especially during crisis, their insight helps us proactively respond to problems before they arise, and that's really critical during crisis.
Thank you. Next up is Todd, followed by Jennifer.
As a couple of people have said, open forum, there are a lot of rules that apply to how board meetings work. And so raising issues in open forum, while it surfaces the issue, is not a great way to engage the board or to get even work done on your issue. And I've reached out, and I'm sure other board members have reached out to both individual students and to our student representatives when issues have been raised. For instance, we had a group of students a few meetings ago raised issues about sexual assault. And I and Ms. DiBrienza both spoke to one of the students who raised those issues, reached out to them, connected with them. Ms. DiBrienza met with them personally. I spoke to them on the phone. And I think it's, so it's a way to surface things, but it's only a beginning. It has to be followed up by some kind of direct contact in order to make progress on the issue.
Thank you. Next up is Jennifer, followed by Jesse.
Yeah, thanks. This is a really good question. There have been, I have a 10th grader now, so we've been in the high schools for, just over a year. And I remember earlier in my term, a bunch of students started to show up and talk about how there were a lot more advanced placement and honors STEM classes than there were humanities classes, and they wanted to see more humanities classes. And it was something I would have no idea. It's something that I had never thought of. And so even though it was just an open forum that they mentioned it provided an opportunity for me to go back and talk to staff and inquire why and try to find out if there are things we could do about it. And it is challenging, but there are some things in the works trying to bring that up. And yes, anytime any student writes to me, emails me and asks to talk to me about something, I will always say yes. So please reach out if there is an issue that you don't see the board reps raising.
Thank you. And finally, Jesse.
Yeah, Ms. Nicewater mentioned earlier that open forum shouldn't be the place where teachers have to raise their issues. And I have a similar comment about students, that shouldn't be the place where you have to do it. There should be other avenues to get your voice heard. You have school board reps, that's true, who come to your schools. You have your own student reps on the board. Hopefully we will get some task forces established on various issues. But I will say, I do think that a critical mass of voices does get heard. And this is advice that I give to parents as well. If there are a lot of students calling in or a lot of students writing emails about the same issue, that is going to get attention, that there's something we need to pay attention to here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adora. We're going to return to Elena for the next question.
Thanks, Jocelyn. So the order for this question will be Karna, then Katie, Todd, Jennifer, Jesse, and Matt. Palo Alto Unified has worked for many years to rectify longtime failed compliance with Title IX, the federal civil rights law that protects students' rights to an education free from sexual misconduct and harassment. Do you think that the district's Title IX compliance has improved? And are there areas that are still lacking from your perspective?
So from my perspective, we are on the right path, but we need to continue to get reports and understand what is going on in terms of process updates and changes. And if those process updates and changes are continuing and that everybody is still on board, I think regular training and regular updates on this topic are very important, because it's just really important that every student and every faculty member feels safe on campus. And so with regular updates on status and regular updates on process and how it's being followed, I think we are in good shape to continue to improve. I think that you can always improve in these spaces. And I think that there's always a chance that something will happen. But if you have that infrastructure in place and you have that reporting in place, you're in a better place to respond to that.
Thank you. Katie?
This summer, I helped a student with her presentation to the Board Policy Review Committee to respond to the Trump administration Title IX changes and redefining what an educational setting is in the wake of distance learning. I went through the process of reporting sexual harassment when I was a PAUSD student. I know what it looks like when it doesn't work, and I know the educators who will wake up early to walk somebody going through the reporting process to class. We've made a lot of really big improvements. My undergraduate studies covered reviewing and reporting Title IX cases and how to address Title IX violations through both policy and community action. My professors included a leading Title IX expert and an attorney from the American Bar Association Commission on Domestic and Sexual Violence. Let's ensure consent education is mandatory, not optional, and is integrated thoroughly. That also means working with City Council to make sure that those efforts are matched outside of school, because it takes all of us to end sexual assault.
Thank you. Todd?
Hey, there's no doubt that our Title IX compliance has improved compliance and processes have improved dramatically. That's a pretty low bar because they were terrible before. We have added a full-time Title IX coordinator and investigator. We've had an incredible Title IX training all throughout the organization. We publish a log every 2 weeks that shows all the new Title IX cases and the disposition of all the old ones. So we are, we've gone from worse to pretty good. But I would say that the most impactful thing, that changes in process don't change culture. And the core to improving in sexual assault and harassment is changing culture. And the most impactful thing I've seen is the student-led task force, which found that student-led discussions in forums, not outside lecturers, not assemblies, not classes, not lawyers, was the key, the most impactful thing to changing how students felt and thought about sexual assault and harassment. And we need more of that.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yes, I'd say certainly our Title IX practices and policies have improved. We have heard from staff and students who have told us that it is much better. And yet I agree, there's always more work to do. And I think I would say the most challenging thing is the climate in our secondary schools. And not about anything about our secondary schools, but about American teen life and social media. It's hard. And so I think one of the most impactful things we could do is make sure we start consent education from kindergarten in developmentally appropriate ways all the way through our curriculum. And if we start in kinder, then by the time they make it up to high school, everyone's used to talking about these things and understands what affirmative consent is, and we have less of a need for our Title IX department.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yes, we have made improvements in policies and procedures. But policies have to be lived in order to be effective. The most recent of the required surveys that we did as a result of the OCR investigation, we administered it to students, and it indicated actually a decrease over the years in the percentage of students who felt that the school responded effectively to claims of harassment. The recent efforts, I think, of the Student Rise task group show us that students think more need to be done to educate their peers about sexual assault, consent, and relationships. They're telling us that they want to talk about this. They're the ones living this. They're saying we need the small group discussions. We need to prioritize ending the culture of silence around these issues.
Thank you. Matt?
Well, yeah, when I was principal here in 2009 and 2012, what struck me then, and it still strikes me now, was a lack of either training or, like Todd said about the culture, there was something off, something wrong with the administrative culture. Great people, but I noticed that procedures, rules, basic stuff were of no concern or of such low priority. This included the universal complaint procedure. This included Title IX issues, Office for Civil Rights, lawsuits, special ed. It was just so lackadaisical that I knew there would be an explosion, which is why I went to Marin County to have another experience. It has come a long way since then because it was so bad, but it is going to take vigilance. It's going to take education, and I'm in total agreement with the consent education. My son is being taught that right now, so I'm in total agreement for that.
All right, now we're going to turn to Ethan Huang. He is a managing editor for the Pali Voice, and he's going to have 2 questions for our candidates. You're up.
Thank you all for being here this evening. The order for this section will be Katie, Todd, Jennifer, Jesse, Matt, and Karna. So the first question is, once schools reopen in January, should students be trusted to social distance, especially during social periods such as lunch? And what sorts of disciplinary action should be taken against students who violate guidelines?
Can you hear me? This is one of my primary concerns about reopening, just because I was a student who went to school when I was sick a lot, and I really worry about the logistical abilities of reinforcing a zero tolerance policy during COVID. So I'm honestly not sure what it would look like to. I'm really worried about how logistically possible it is going to be to enforce social distancing.
Thank you. Todd?
Thank you. We need to social distance. The only way to maintain low rates of COVID transmission is to follow the rules. I actually have I believe that our students can follow the rules. It won't be perfect. That's not what the requirement is. The requirement is to follow them closely and to, as best as practically we can. I think our students will do that. I think our staff will help them do that. I know there's students all over the world doing it, so I know our students can do it too. And will it be a change? Absolutely. But we've got smart, motivated, engaged, and socially focused students, and I think they will help us do the right things.
Thank you. Jennifer?
I hope that we get to go back in some way in person before January. And I don't know if our classes will be back in January, but I do hope that they are. Either way, whenever students are together on our campuses, they do need to follow social distancing and wear masks. It will be a challenge because I think you all miss each other and are excited to be together. But it is vital. It is the only way. I mean, part of the safety plan involves that. And so last night we voted on a plan and we assured teachers that we were going to follow the practices and keep them safe. So students have to. I believe that you can do it. I think there will be some reminders, but I do think that there has to be consequences if students don't. If students refuse or if students aren't being safe, then we have to keep everyone else safe and staff safe and other students.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yeah, this question just makes me really sad. You guys are just having to grow up way too fast. And I'm a parent of 4 kids in this district. My oldest is in 8th grade, and it's breaking my heart every day to watch the things that they're having to learn how to do. Their new normal is, masks when they're playing in the backyard with Barbies. And they're doing it. We need to get you guys out of your houses. We need to get you with your friends. We need to get you practicing this in small groups. I agree. Let's try to do it in some way before classes start. you guys are inheriting this world for us that we've screwed up, sort of. So you've got to figure out how to do this, and we're here to support you.
Thank you. And Matt?
No, I trust our students, even at all grades. I was teaching kindergarten earlier this year, transitional kindergarten first and second grade, all in one class. And we were already practicing the safety stuff, not because of any virus coming from another land, but just because, after kids sneeze in your face a couple times, we're going to do that. So, the students, I would tell them as a principal, tell them as a teacher, listen, and this is what language I use, you're going to have to be cool with me and the other teachers reminding you, hey, 6 feet apart, because we're going to mask up. We're going to go 6 feet apart. I just hope we can get back in time, because I'm a little worried we're going to come back in the fall here and there's going to be an outbreak. And I don't know what our plan is. We might end up going right back in January anyway. But yeah, kids can be trusted. We have to give them reminders. They're going to be fine.
Thank you. And Karna?
So I think kids are perfectly capable of wearing masks and distancing. If my 7-year-old can do it every day, then I am sure that high school students can. And my 7-year-old does. He did it in summer camps, junior museum and zoo camp. He's doing it at AKC, the kids club right now. And so the high schools is just another place, and it just takes some time to get used to the practice of wearing a mask, get used to the practice of distancing. And, we're really lucky. We have schools that are open. We're not all in one building with tight, hallways. I talk with people in other school districts, and that is really stressful, but we have open spaces for people to distance. And it won't be easy, but it's totally possible. And I want to see kids able to have that experience even now with their friends, using their masks and social distancing to build those relationships.
Thank you for your responses. The second question is, the Pally and Gun bell schedules have been changed numerous times in recent years, but are now unified because of the pandemic. Moving forward, would you commit to unifying the schedules at the two schools, and what changes would you make to the current one, if any? Starting with Katie.
If the community is interested in this, and I've heard a lot of positive reasons for keeping them unified, I would absolutely be open to keeping them unified. I actually think this is a perfect example of how each board member is assigned schools to be a liaison to. And I think whoever is assigned to the high schools, talking with each other and talking about encouraging communication and getting feedback on the benefits and the detriments.
Thank you. Todd?
Yes, I think having, there are definitely benefits from having similar or the same schedules in the two schools. Our high schools, while they have cultural and historic differences, are very similar in both their curriculum and the kind of students that they serve. And there are definitely benefits that come from having similar classes, especially now that we're more fluent with remote learning. The idea that kids at one school could take classes remotely at another school would be impossible if the bell schedules weren't the same. That's something I would love to see our kids able to do, because we do have electives and programs at one school that aren't available at another school. So I'd be in favor of that, and to the extent that we can maintain it.
Thank you. And Jennifer?
Yeah, definitely. When I was first elected to the board, one of the first things I talked to the then superintendent about was aligning bell schedules. And he immediately shut it down and said, Gun has had like 3 different bell schedules in the last 4 years. We're not changing it again. It was just a non-starter. So I was thrilled, in the middle of a horrible pandemic that is causing so much damage, there are these little silver linings in places. And the fact that it forced us to do this, it helps us with efficiency in staff. There can be a staff member that teaches at both schools, not right on top of each other. There's no time to move back and forth between the two. And also for students to take classes remotely. For a class that is working remotely now, for a student to be able to take a class in one place when they're in the other place, just go into the library and put on a laptop and Zoom into the other school or however it is. I think it's perfect. The one thing I would change is that Monday schedule, which was just made for hybrid, and it's not working out so well right now for a lot of students.
Thank you. Jessie?
Yes, I would love to keep the bell schedules the same. I think it really, like a couple people have mentioned, it encourages kids from the different high schools also to maybe interact a little bit more. You know, and I think this is sort of combined with the later start time too, but right now my daughter's on a swim team and she's getting to do swim practice before school in the morning. And there's kids, she's in middle school, but there's kids from the other middle school on her swim team. And so she has these friends from across the city that's available to her because the bell schedules are the same. So I'd love to keep them the same. I'd love to keep the late start times, and I'd love to change the Monday schedule. So hopefully we can take all of that forward into in-person school.
Thank you. Matt?
Well, yeah, this pandemic has really shown us what we need to prioritize. And as far as the bell schedules, unify them as best as possible. I always believe in standardizing these things at the core and allowing some room for changes to individualize and personalize to a school or even a school system. Not the site-based leadership of where you're doing separate from the rest of the district, but the site-based leadership where you're doing everything you can to adhere to the implementation with a little bit, again, that individualization. Also, late start times have been a blessing for, well, both one kid has to get up really early. She has school on the East Coast, but late start times, I hope we can keep those when we come back.
Thank you. And Karna?
So I believe that the standardized bell schedule is a great thing for all the reasons stated. I do think we need to change the Monday schedule because that only exists for the pandemic, and I don't think that's a long-term solution. I do think that we need to standardize the start time, so every day isn't a different start time. So having a 9 a.m. across the board start time would be good, because we also don't want the day to go too late and interrupt the ability for kids to do extracurricular activities, from theater to sports to other things. And as we hit winter, the days get darker, and I want kids to be able to still bike home or feel safe wherever they're at. So I think a standardized bell schedule with a later start and no Monday schedule will be a great thing for us to have post-pandemic. And I think right now it's really working.
Well, I just really want to thank our 3 student journalists for being panelists today. They had excellent, excellent questions. And it's great to hear.
Oh, Zoom.
All right.
Distance learning, what could go wrong?
So let's move on. We're gonna address some questions we've received from readers in the last few weeks. And Jocelyn and I will rotate as she gets back. We will start with the order of candidates, Todd, Jennifer, Jesse, Matt, Karna, and Katie. With the huge benefit of our high property value, and these are directly from readers, with the huge benefit of our high property values and the resulting tax revenues that are far greater than our neighboring communities, do you believe it is fair or right that our school district should continue to use parcel taxes to generate additional revenue, especially in light of projections of declining enrollment?
Thank you so much for raising this. I am a huge proponent of Measure O, which is the renewal of our parcel tax. It will be a disaster if we do not pass Measure O, and we will have the prospect of either drawing $10 million plus in reserves or laying off over 100 staff members. Neither one of those, I think, is acceptable. I think it would be terrible if we don't. In a stable, our enrollment has declined by 1% a year for the last 5 years. That is not really meaningful decline. So no, I don't think cutting the parcel tax is appropriate. We maintain the parcel tax. The proposal is to maintain the parcel tax at exactly the same amount it was last year, no increase at all, which reflects that our enrollment has flattened out as well. And I think that's appropriate.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks. I am also a big supporter of the parcel tax, of Measure O. I think that, as Mr. Collins and I recently talked about this, a 1% decline in enrollment is not a significant decline in enrollment. And we are currently talking around the city of redeveloping Ventura, Stanford University coming back with a GUP, there are variations in enrollment that just go up and down by little bits. I think it's one of the things that makes our district stand out so much. We have many, many things that we offer for students to do, especially in our secondary schools, but I think there's a lot of extras in our elementaries too, and this is how we afford to do them. So can we get by without approximately $16 million? Sure, we could figure it out, but it would not look anything like PAUSD looks.
Thank you. Jessie?
Yeah, I agree with what both Mr. Collins and Mr. Brianza just said. I'm a big supporter of Measure O. The problem with funding in education is not districts like PAUSD being able to pass parcel taxes. The funding is that we don't have enough money in public education. We underfund our schools. Prop 13 passed and we went from, among the top in the nation to among the bottom. There's just not enough money. So yes, of course we could get by without this money. Districts all over the country get by without this money. We're one of only 100 basic aid states in California, but we will not look like Palo Alto. Our schools will not be what everybody has been used to for decades. So vote Measure O.
Thank you, Matt.
Yes to the parcel tax, unequivocally. I don't like the threat that 100 teachers will be fired. That's an empty threat. It never happens. They do lay off tons of people. I've been in this situation. It's not going to happen. It's not fair to our community. So I don't like that threat. Also don't like the wasted money we spent on that flyer. I don't know how that got through the board, administrative staff. It wasn't good. Last thing I don't like before I get to what I do like, city council, reading in the newspaper that they may or may not support it. The board's messaging has got to be better with that city council, and I'll do that. Without that parcel tax, I can, as a principal, run a school. It's what makes Palo Alto separately better than all the schools that don't have parcel taxes. It's unfair to those other schools, but it's what makes the quality so high in Palo Alto. Also, finally, our property values rise with that parcel tax. Trust me on this. So definitely yes.
Thank you, Karna.
So responding to the question, I think that what Palo Alto really values is the amazing programming we have in our schools. We have amazing arts and extracurriculars and all of these things that make our education special. And that's why we have the parcel tax. That's why we have the type of funding that we have. And I think we all really want that to continue. We don't want to have to cut electives. We don't want to have to cut art programs. And so that's why it's really important that we continue to fund at the level that we have. And it's why it's really important that everybody votes yes on Measure O, because we want to be a school district that has an amazing variety of programming that's really allowing students access to so many things that will inspire them. And I think it is fair because this is what we've invested in.
Thank you, Katie.
With everybody, please vote to pass Measure O. We've been saying in our budget cuts that we will be cutting as far away from the classroom as possible. If the parcel tax doesn't pass this fall, that's going to be a lot harder to do. And what I am looking for when we make those tough budget calls is that they stay as far away from impacting the classroom and impacting learning as possible. That's going to be a lot more difficult if this doesn't pass.
Thank you. And here's our next reader question. Given the district is moving ahead to reopen classrooms, how many COVID cases among staff and students should trigger a return to virtual learning? And should the district give regular updates as to how many students and staff test positive for COVID during the school year? And the order for this one will be Jennifer, Jessie, Matt, Karna, Katie, and Todd. So we'll start with Jennifer.
So we are following the Santa Clara County Public Health Protocol, which is what we have done since March 12th and will continue to do. And once our school is open again, we are supposed to stay open until there is a 5% positivity rate, which sounds pretty high. So I don't know that we'll stick with that, but we have been following the science all along. As for COVID cases, again, following county lead on that, I think it makes sense to let people know, although I also think that people know like before the board knows, right? It just, news flies fast and furious, but I think that it's important to make sure facts are out there rather than I heard about this case. Or what I think is most compelling so far is that cases that have happened in our city have involved someone with a positive case, but absolutely no spread. The protocols were in place and there's no known positivity from spread.
Thank you, Jessie.
Yes, the county guidance says if 5% of the school tests positive, then schools need to close. That's a lot of positive cases. And if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing with safety regulations and cohorts, we should see no spread. So the way elementary schools are opening is in cohorts of, the most will be 10 kids. If there is a positive case within the cohort, then the cohort is quarantined. So people are going to know that there was a positive case, right? Because like the whole class is not going to come to school. So yes, we should share that information. Otherwise it's just going to be crazy rumor mill. So we absolutely should share it. We need to protect people's privacy. But I am optimistic that we will be able to we'll keep things from spreading if we follow the rules.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Obviously, well, let me preface by saying, I'm very careful about saying we're just going to robotically follow the guidance of this organization. As leaders, we do have to make decisions. And I would hope we would come in with a standard lower than the 5%. I'm not comfortable with it. As for updates, as many updates as we possibly reasonably can give, absolutely. We have to do that in the schools, whether a principal or as an educator. If any kid gets measles, any kid gets other illnesses, we don't have to do it for lice anymore. Apparently that's okay according to the American Pediatric Association, but definitely this is serious. We parents, we community members, we want to know and we should know.
Thank you, Karna.
So I think it's very important that we continue to follow county guidance. And what I have seen in the kids clubs is that there has been no spread, even if there has been a COVID positive case. And that's really the important thing, is that by following all of the guidance, we are preventing spread. We can't prevent people from getting COVID, but we can prevent the spread of COVID. And that's why you follow the guidance of letting the cohort know and having them quarantine and having them test if appropriate if they show symptoms. I think about the lice notices I've gotten several times in my daughter's classes, and you just do what you're supposed to do. You check for lice, then you follow your process. And I think that we can easily do this within the schools to prevent the spread and to make sure that everybody does stay safe.
Thank you, Katie.
The guidelines have us responsible for early notification of cases. I think that's a big ask for a school district, especially during flu season. The guidelines around this virus have changed the last few months as we've learned new information about COVID-19 or as cases have spiked, and we've struggled to communicate during those months. And I don't know what has changed in terms of our communication now. Before we return, let's establish a clear, organized communication with members of the PAUSD community and then utilize a communications officer. And let's get a consensus between our educators, family, and community members who would be directly impacted by the reopening that they do not feel their safety is at risk.
And do you think that the district should provide regular updates on positive cases in the district?
Yes.
Thank you. Todd?
So in terms of when we would close, the guidelines actually say a 5% is a guideline in conjunction with discussion with the public health officer. And because it's responsive to the local conditions as well as the conditions in your specific schools and district. And so I don't want people to focus on some 5% bright line test. We're going to be in constant communication with the county public health officer. If we start having outbreaks in our schools, we're going to look seriously at closing. As Karna said, now I think it's important for people to understand there have been 600 to 800 kids on our campuses every day for the last month. So this is not kind of a new thing. We don't have any experience with it. Oh my goodness, the kids are going to be there. Between our child care provider partners, PAUSD Plus, special education students, we have hundreds of kids on campus every day. And there have been a handful of breakouts, a handful of cases, not breakouts, and the childcare part of the operation. In terms of your other question about reporting the numbers, I've talked to the superintendent. We will be reporting the numbers on a weekly basis, probably by school.
All right, thank you, Todd. Our next question is about the Asian community. The order will be Jesse, Matt, Karna, Katie, Todd, and Jennifer. So this reader says, many Asian American parents feel stigmatized at PAUSD when it comes to support for their priorities. This reader feels that neighboring districts seem to do a better job of working with diverse families and serving broader needs and priorities. She wants to know, what are you planning to do to help Asian American families feel more welcome and respected? So we'll start with Jesse.
Yeah, I don't think it's any secret that PAUSD has trouble creating an inclusive school environment that makes children of different racial, socioeconomic demographics feel comfortable and included. I would agree with that. We have to do better, and that is one of the main reasons I am running, is to help with the structural and systemic issues in the culture and climates of our schools. I think that another one of my priorities is to reach out proactively to parents and students and staff who don't feel like they have a voice in the district. I think the people that call in and write emails already feel like they're valued, and we're missing wisdom of people who feel not included.
Thank you, Jesse. Matt?
Well, number one, I would reach out as much as I could, just as I did when I worked here, and just as I did in my last district for 8 years. Everybody matters. Everybody's viewpoint must be represented at the table and should be included when making decisions. There's a lot of groups that I'm meeting in the campaign. I'm learning great things. The hiring decision last month really disrespected our Asian community, and I couldn't believe that we weren't sensitive enough to think about that and anticipate that that might be an issue. That wouldn't happen under me. I would have voted no on that. So we need to be sensitive to all our groups, and especially the many different ethnicities that make up our larger Asian population. They're over a third of our school district, I believe. And so they need their due.
Okay, thank you. Karna?
I think it is very important that we hear and listen to our entire community. And in talking with a variety of parents over the last month and a half, I have heard so many stories that really pain me about people feeling ridiculed, excluded, nobody cares about what they're saying. I think that there's a lot of bias in our system and a lot of unconscious bias as well. And I think that all of our parent organizations and teachers really need to do some strong unconscious bias training, because I think the tone starts at the top. And if everybody is making fun of or making jokes about a group of people, or not listening to them because they speak in a way or share things in a way that somebody's not comfortable with, then that group is never going to get heard. And that's just going to train our kids to know that you don't have to listen to people that are different from you.
All right, thank you. Katie's next.
There was a student who reached out to me about this and felt it was really important. She really wanted to see a board member acknowledge that often when we talk about academic stress and mental health, that often the Asian American community is used as a racist scapegoat, and that is not acceptable. We are a diverse community, but we don't always give diversity the vehicles it needs to thrive. And I think that starts with giving students greater influence in the community so that they can really see themselves. Last year, I helped the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation with their fundraising to create more community events, because right now we have so many events in the schools that students create that reflect many different cultures, but we don't have that reflected out in the community. And I really want to see that reflected.
Thank you. Todd?
One of the things this is a huge issue in Palo Alto. And one of the things I'm happiest about and somewhat proud of is when I was on the Gun PTA executive board more than 10 years ago, there were no Asian members of that. The school was 35% Asian, and there were no Asian members. There was actually a separate Asian community, Chinese community group, that sponsored an event that actually ran the money through the PTA, but worked completely outside, separate from the PTA. what I was delighted by was when I ran 4 years ago, I revisited that group, and that was now half of the community was Asian, and many immigrant Chinese. I think that's incredibly important. I've worked with the Chinese parent clubs, the South Asian groups. I think integrating our newcomers and our people with views different than ours into our community is essential for the success of our students.
Okay, thank you, Todd. And Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. I thank the person that brought this question up. We are a system, we are a school system, and like all systems, we have bias. We make assumptions, we judge. I think everyone does it, and PAUSD is not exempt from that. I think we have a lot of work to do, and I think that work needs to start at the top with the board and leadership engaging in unconscious bias and anti-racism training. I have started that work, but have much more to do. It's really never complete. It's a process. Everyone really needs to feel included in our district. Everyone needs to be listened to. Everyone needs to be respected. And we have to have patience for each other. We come with very different experiences and histories and values and assumptions. So really listening and patience and tolerance is the start.
Thank you. Here's the next reader question. What does it say about the state of the district that so many families hire outside tutors for their children? And is that of concern to you? We will start with Matt, and then Karna, Katie, Todd, Jennifer, and Jesse.
You know, I don't think it says that much. I think that's a personal choice to hire a tutor. My daughter, when she went off to Marin County, her whole life changed in terms of math. She would have been in a just regular math here, but she ended up going into geometry in 8th grade because, well, I was her principal, and I made that happen not only because we couldn't offer algebra. We couldn't do it. She ended up excelling, but then in 9th grade, because she didn't have algebra, she found herself on her own, and her mom and I determined we can't afford that. And like so many Palo Alto parents, we can't afford tutoring. We are educators, but we're working, and we don't have a lot of time to teach the kids. So I think that the classes are okay. I think tutoring is a personal decision to go above and beyond, much like our athletic clubs here in Palo Alto.
Go ahead, Karna, sorry.
Okay, so when I think about tutoring, I think about what is the reason why parents are tutoring their kids, or what are the reason why kids are asking sometimes to be tutored. And often what I've heard from students and from parents is that the kids are not getting the instruction they need in the classroom. The classes are great, the classes are rigorous, but they're not getting the instruction from the teachers, and it's causing stress for them. And so the tutors are helping them get the instruction that's missing. And so I think we need to look at why tutors are needed. Is it needed because somebody wants to get ahead? Or is it needed because somebody's stressed because the teachers aren't providing the instruction that they need to be giving? And depending on the cause, I think that we should be really just looking into that.
Thank you, Katie.
I'm going to take a little bit from each of those answers. So there's always going to be things we can't control about whether or not somebody's using an outside service. Sometimes, you know, as has been said, people might go to tutors for a variety of reasons. But when we're doing our jobs well, people don't feel the need to supplement our education. So that starts with, kind of like Karna said, listening to our families and educators. Is there a step our educators are missing? Is there a step that our families are missing?
Thank you. And Todd?
Thanks. I want to echo what the other said. Tutoring by itself is not, people want to hire outside assistants and do outside activities for their kids for a variety of reasons. So I don't think that's by itself a red flag. But I do think if students want to accelerate and feel the need to go outside to do that, then that suggests that we may not be serving their needs. If a large number of students are doing that, that's an indicator that we may not be serving their needs. And so that's why, for instance, we undertook to look at and put new proposals forward for middle school math, because it was clear that there were a variety of students, both the highest performing and some of the ones that were struggling, that we were not serving well. And so, you know, I think it's important to use that as an indicator, kind of there may be something to look at. And if a lot of people are going outside, then that may be an indicator that we might want to do something different.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Yeah, thanks. I agree with what a lot of people said. The tutors exist for a reason, right? They provide a service that is needed, and quite often that is a totally legitimate thing. And I hope that if people need help, they get the help they need, although I'd like to think that the district can provide that help. I think there is a fear around here of not doing things well. I have a high schooler now, and kids talk all the time about how many kids take the class before they take the class. That maybe you spent the summer in a geometry class before you take geometry, or spent the summer in calculus before you take calculus, and how that shuffles the psyche of all the kids in the class. And now, oh, I need a tutor because half the kids in the class have already done this, and it just gets going. It just spirals, and this is, I think, is where part of our culture and climate issue. I don't think it just happens at school. When my daughter was 10 and played softball, people started talking about private coaches. I think it's something here that we need to continue to work on beyond just the school district.
Thank you. Jessie?
Yes, I absolutely agree. What people do extracurricular activities for their kids is a personal decision. We should have, that is none of our business, and people can do whatever they want. I do think the quality of instruction in the classrooms is crucial, and we need to realize how crucial differentiated instruction is, particularly I think in the younger grades. And we need to recognize that kids see what's going on. I mean, my second grader has said to me numerous times that her friend goes to school after school, and she thinks something's wrong with her because she doesn't know how to do multiplication when she was in second grade. So teachers, we really need to be aware as a district that kids are internalizing this and have a plan for how to handle that in classrooms in a respectful and mindful and nurturing way.
All right, our next topic is big, but the question is simple. It's on communication and trust. How would you grade communication and trust between the school board and the community, and how can it be improved? We will start with Karna and go to Katie, Todd, Jennifer, Jessie, and Matt. Karna, you're up.
So the community trust and communication are all not great right now. I think the lack of trust starts from, I think, poor communication, poor planning, poor rollout, all of those different things make people feel like, I don't know what's going on. All spring, I felt like, I don't know what's going on. My kids aren't learning anything. I'm hearing different stories. I'm learning about schedule changes or a new start date because it's hidden in the bottom of some email that I didn't even know I should read. It's really, really stressful as a parent to not know what's going on and to have things dribble out in different ways. And so I think if we improve our communication, we can start to rebuild trust.
And how exactly would the communication be improved in your mind?
So I think the communication could be improved by, I think really we need a good project manager who's gathering information from all the different stakeholders and putting it together in a way that's digestible. We can't have 40 paragraphs. We need to have something that outlines things that need action, dates that are important, and then where you can get more information on different topics that are relevant. It needs to be regular. It's like every Monday we get this, or twice a week we get this, and the timing depends on the frequency of how important it is to update. And it could be a communications person, but really I feel like we're not gathering the information in the right way in order to build the story that has to go out to the parents and out to the community.
Thank you, Karna. Yeah, thanks for the clarification. Katie's next.
Thank you. Ooh, I'm not sure what grade I would give the district, but I think the biggest takeaway from last night is that we need a communications officer, and I think that's just incredibly important. I also think that if elected in the next evaluation of the superintendent, I am going to be looking for improvement in communication.
Thank you, Katie. Todd.
We definitely need to improve communication. And Ms. DeBrienza asked for at the last board meeting, and I think we'll definitely have it on the next board agenda, is discussion of hiring a an information officer, as they call them in the government, which is basically a head communication person. There are very few districts of our size and type that do not have a person like that. In the past, the board has made the decision that rather than spend money on polishing communications, they'd spend money on things that directly affected students. In a situation like this, that has come back to bite us. And I think that we need to change that. The superintendent had hired some contract help to support him during the pandemic. Clearly, it hasn't been sufficient. And so I'm confident that we will be hiring a chief information officer soon.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Jennifer.
I feel like I'm always following Todd these days. I don't know. Yeah, I think obviously there's room for improvement here. When you talk about the quantity of communication, I think that's actually pretty good. But I think there's so much information coming at you. It's why my entire term I've been asking for a communications officer. At the beginning, we had one, and in a previous round of budget cuts, that person was let go. And this is a community that needs it. I think there are a lot of people that just want high-level bullets. There are a lot of people that want in the weeds. There's a lot of people that want in between, and there's many different people communicating. I think that when our students start to suffer is when the people that we hire to do education jobs start trying to become communicators themselves. And they spend a lot of their time trying to just communicate their plan instead of actually doing their plan. I think everyone suffers. So we really need a communications officer, and I think that will start to rebuild trust.
Thank you, Jennifer. And Jesse, you're up.
Yeah, Ms. DiBrienza just made the point that I really wanted to drive home. In the spring, I was communicating with board members a lot about school closures and confusion. And somebody in some email to me said, we have dropped the ball on communication. We've been working so hard on trying to solve the problems, and we haven't been good enough about the way we're communicating. And it really, like a light bulb went off in my head, because in my business, what I try to always do is get people to focus on their own areas of expertise. Like, I don't need salespeople, figuring out how to be production people. I just need you being the best salesperson you can be. And that's exactly what we need at the district. We need the educators focusing on education, and the district people focusing on their individual jobs. And we need a communications person. So my budget brain has come around to agreeing that we need to spend money on this position.
All right. And Matt, do you think we need a public information person?
No. I'm not going to waste more than $200,000 in total comp away from my son's classroom, away from all the other children's classrooms, teacher supplies, when the property taxes go down, on a mouthpiece who's going to cut articles out. That's what they did last time. Second lesson in administrator school and in teacher school is we have to learn how to communicate. At the last 8 years, I've done a Spanish-English newsletter every single Friday, never missed one. I posted it to the web. We have to communicate. We board member candidates here, we're all communicating right now. So it's incumbent upon us to do our job. And as administrators, that's our job. So I'm not gonna waste over 200 grand on this position. Don Austin can do it, and the board president can do it.
Okay, we're continuing with the theme of grades. If you were to give letter grades to first the superintendent and then to the current school board, what grades would you give them and why? And the order for this is Katie, Todd, Jennifer, Jesse, Matt, and Karna.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I think that I would give the current board and the current superintendent, I'm going to give I think I have a B- for both. I think that, one, I'm incredibly grateful. When I was preparing to run for this position, I wouldn't be running for this position if I didn't have a tremendous amount of respect for how hard the board is working, how hard the superintendent is working, how hard our staff is working. And as the superintendent has been emphasizing over and over again, we have to always align on our values and assume hard work and good intention. And I see that, and I see that we're aligned on our values. But I do think that we've moved away from immediate problems at hand into focusing on unpredictable goals.
Thank you. Todd, how would you grade yourself?
I believe in more mastery-oriented grading. So I don't think attaching arbitrary letter grades is actually a sensible practice. superintendents or boards. I do think assessment is important, and I think the board, if you look at the board compared to where it was 4 years ago, I think we have dramatically improved our practices in almost every respect. I think the board is tremendously better and the district is stronger than it was 4 years ago or longer ago than that. I think under the pandemic, we, like everyone else, have struggled. And there are definitely things that served us well before that do not serve us well now. And we need to change our practices to adjust to the needs. And I'd say the same as the superintendent, like virtually everybody else on the planet, he has strengths and weaknesses, and we need to build on his strengths and try to support him on his weaknesses. And so the communications person that we were talking about in the previous question, I think is a real important support that we need.
Thank you. And Jennifer, how about you?
I am all about standards-based grading, not loving those letter grades. And I think that, I mean, there are ways that we exceed standard and the ways that we're, approaching and not there. If for all parties, both the board and the leadership of the district, if intent was all that mattered and effort was all that mattered, we're like all exceeding standard, right? Everyone has been working so hard during this pandemic and whatever it is they're doing. But impact is what matters more. And that's where I think we need improvement, that no matter what intention is, things are landing in a way that is not as effective as they could be. So I think we are working towards standard on the impact that our work has had on the community.
Thank you. Jessie?
I'm going to go with the elementary grading of needs improvement meets or exceeds standards. I want to start by saying I think everybody at the district is very sincere in their desire to do right. And I think they do not get enough credit for how hard they have been working since March, dealing with COVID and school closures. I mean, like nobody took a day off or almost an hour off. And they're exhausted and they're burned out. And I know we all are, but I think they are too, and we need to acknowledge that. I think that, the theme of my campaign is humility and innovation. And I think that PAUSD, because we have been a leader in public education for so long, we've drank our own Kool-Aid a little bit. I would like to see us ask for help more. I would like to see us admit that we don't know something. Part of transparency is saying, I made a mistake and I'm sorry, and here's how we're going to fix it.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, letter grades, the board and the superintendent would not get S. This is a time of COVID. Everyone gets a break period. As far as standards-based grading, somewhere between needs improvement and not proficient. I go to my UC Santa Cruz days of the narrative-based grading. This board has struggled in communication and in other ways. They need to be a lot better. It's a primary reason why I'm running and saying, listen, I can learn from you, you can learn from me, but we got to get together and we need to be better. We should be better. As far as the superintendent, if we isolate him, he's not bad. He's not that bad after seeing the last two. I see a lot less showmanship in him and a little more, authenticity. But they need to improve if they're going to salvage this year.
Thank you. And Karna?
So for standards-based grading, I would go to the C, area of concern, and I think it could be both grades. Just because the communication, which was probably a D, was so poor. And I worry that the communication was poor, not because people didn't know how to communicate, but because the information wasn't organized or the information wasn't there, or various stakeholders weren't sharing the information together so that you could put together an easy and clear communication. So it's an area of concern, but you can always work on that. We're early in the school year. It's, end of the school year. We'll see if they meet the standard, and hopefully over the course of this year with this new board that we're going to be getting, we'll exceed expectations by the end of the year.
All right, the next topic that readers want to know about is sports. And the first person up will be Todd. There's quite a bit of preamble here, so I will take the time now to read it. So current funding is in the neighborhood of $65,000 per high school for sports, which is earmarked across 25 plus teams for transportation, reconditioning of football and lacrosse helmets, football pads and jerseys, coaches' stipends, facilities. Everything else is funded through Pali Sports Boosters, this person's from Pali, or individual donations. It deters many students from participating because of the donation ask and can give the impression that you have to pay to play. So the question is, what is your opinion on the importance of high school athletics and the lack of PAUSD funding for it? Todd, followed by Jennifer, and we go on alphabetically.
So one of the tenets of California law is that free education has to be free. We used to have mandatory athletic fees when not even that long ago. And that funded a bunch of high school athletics. We correctly got rid of those because they're basically illegal. So there shouldn't be any fee required for students to participate, not just in sports, but in any extracurricular activity. That's part of our offerings. So we can't do that. The voluntary donation, I've had kids in sports programs. If the athletic director is doing their job, it is extremely clearly communicated that no donation is mandatory. I know this firsthand because I've been a parent in sports teams and sat in on those discussions. If that's not done all the time, then we need to address that very sharply with the athletic directors, because it must be communicated that nothing is required in order to participate. Okay,
and a 15-second follow-up. Do you think that athletics needs to be funded to a greater extent?
I'd be open to it, though I think we got to look to it in proportion, how it relates to how we fund other things that are equally important extracurricular activities.
Thank you. Jennifer.
Yeah, thanks. This is something that I hadn't thought about until I had kids that were older in our schools. So I've been thinking a lot about it. I think that, first of all, yes, no one is required to make a donation. We may not require anyone to pay to play. And we do have to make that very clear. Of course, that does leave the burden on many families that can afford it. One of my concerns with funding sports in a tremendous way is that a lot of the sports that kids play, not all of them, because I know some kids just walk right onto a team, but a lot of them, the way that you make the varsity team or the way that you make the high school team is that you've been doing club sports all along. So already the only kids who that have a good odds of making it onto the team are kids that already their families have invested a lot of money. So I think there's a real equity issue here. And I do want to make sure that we encourage kids to be safe and participate. But thinking about how we fund it, I think takes a lot more conversation.
Okay, fair enough. Jessie.
Yeah, this question is kind of analogous to the math tutor question, isn't it? Right? I mean, like there's a lot of kids whose parents are paying for them to participate in extracurricular sports activities from the time they're really little. And those are the kids that for the most part are populating varsity teams. And this has huge implications for the culture and climate of our schools. This goes to student mental wellness. This goes to educational equity. This goes to a feeling of inclusion and really being part of a school community. And the same goes for things like orchestra, where kids, take violin lessons for years. I would love to see athletics funded at the high school level, at least so we could have a junior varsity team of the major sports teams. I mean, we can't make it available to every kid, but at least just enough. So you don't necessarily have to be in club since you were 5.
Thank you, Jessie. Matt is next.
Yeah, I've coached and taught tennis, basketball, baseball, cross country, track, the whole thing in the last 8 years. And I think Jessie touched a little bit on it, which is there's a mental health aspect to participation in sports. Not so much that you made a team, but it's the actual activity of working out, of the camaraderie. And, I know we can find $200,000 by not hiring a public information officer and increase participation in freshman, JV, and varsity teams. So definitely we have to improve that. I doubled and tripled the participation at my last school, and that was a way to increase academics and increase enrollment, and it worked. So athletics is a big part of school, and it should stay that way. And we do need to increase their funding.
All right, thank you. Karna.
I was a varsity volleyball player in college, and I think sports are a wonderful thing. But I also think it's really important you think about what types of sports kids can and do play. A lot of universities are cutting a lot of their sports programs. And what I found so valuable after that first year in college was playing on intramurals and playing on club sports. And we don't need to just have sports that are for varsity sports, that are for going for the CCS championships. We need to have sports and other activities that kids can play at different levels. And I think we need to think about how can we appropriately fund sports so that more kids can participate and can find something that they'll love and enjoy, but maybe not be the very, very best at.
Sounds good. Katie.
Thank you. I think I'm going to echo a lot of points that have already been said. So one, I want to touch on the ask, because I've been a student in this school and I know in this district, and I know that the ask is an equity issue and it does deter some students. And part of that goes to highlighting point persons so that parents, when they have an issue like that, know who they can go talk to, and knowing that they can go and talk to board members. Part of this is an equity issue. I've done fundraising for the Palo Alto Recreation Foundation, which helps address this issue in our community. And that means that we need to be collaborating with City Council to make sure there are opportunities to support our kids in our schools and in our neighborhoods. Because as has been said, these aren't just any activity, whether sports, whether arts, which is what I did. These aren't just activities, these can be mental health resources for students.
All right, thank you all. Back to Elena.
I believe this is our last reader question. If and when PAUSD fully opens schools for in-person classes, should there be an option for students to attend online only, at least until there's a vaccine? And the order for this is Jennifer, Jesse, Matt, Karna, Katie, and Todd.
Yes, my answer is yes. There are kids that need to. There are kids that can't come back either because of their own health or their family's health or whatever the reason. So there definitely has to be a way to participate remotely. And the question is how, right? If we had an unlimited budget, then we could hire a whole mess of teachers just to teach online when we're back. Hopefully we will be back soon. That might mean streaming, that might not. Of course, that's a negotiable thing. I don't like the idea of disincentivizing kids from staying home when they don't feel well. So even kids who are not precluded from attending in person, if they're not feeling well during this very sensitive health time, I want them to stay home and get better, and I don't want them to miss school. So we still have to work that out, but yes, definitely kids should be able to stay home and still get 100% education.
Thank you. Jesse?
Yes, absolutely. We were having to reinvent education in a crisis. This has to be part of that reinvention. Every family situation is different. Every student situation is different. Our mission is to educate every student to reach their potential. And if students need to be home, then we need to figure out how to make that happen. I would absolutely be open to, if we can negotiate it, live streaming in secondary schools, so we can serve as many kids at home as need to be there.
Thank you. Matt?
Yeah, in this year, 2020 to 2021, the educational year, definitely online only should be an option. I think the vast majority of our educators and our students have demonstrated proficiency in doing this. I mean, that's one of the few positives that has come out of all this mess. This year we have to be extremely flexible in everything we do around school and support our students. The live streaming has come up. I've been talking to folks about it. I have serious doubts about live streaming for 2020 to 2021 in conjunction with in-person learning in the same class, mainly because of privacy issues of the students, privacy issues of the staff. But definitely we can go online for those who need it.
Thank you. Karna?
So I think it is very important that we have a distance learning option for all of the families who think it's important. But I do think that there's a distinction between a distance learning plan for everyone and a plan that allows people that have to stay home because they're sick or because something else is happening to have access to the same educational material that the students on site are having. But I think the great thing that we can take away from our pandemic response is figuring out how to create that type of content and provide that content to students in the future. So we can learn from our experiences this year so that in the future, all students, whether they're homesick or on campus, will be able to have access to the same materials, whether by live stream or actually probably better to have by sort of saved videos or saved materials.
Thank you. And Katie, go ahead. You're muted.
Got it. It's going to happen once. Karna just touched on a point that's really important to me. Yes, we absolutely should. And I'm all about, like, let's use this pandemic to develop the next innovative approaches to support vulnerable students. And what are we going to use after the pandemic? Let's use this period to develop a stronger remote learning that students can use in the future.
Thank you. Todd?
Yes. They do it all over the country. We should be doing it here too. So yes.
All right, we've come to the bewitching hour. So we're gonna have one last question. For those of you in the audience, we told the candidates there will not be a closing statement, but there is a closing question. This is the question, and if I can get our timekeeper to do 30 seconds instead of 45. The final question is, just tell us about one challenge facing the district that we haven't discussed tonight and what you want to do about it. We start with Jesse, we go to Matt, Karna, Katie, Todd, and Jennifer. So Jesse, you're up first.
So my issue that you're going to hear me talk about a lot is structured literacy. The very, fundamental thing that a school district should be doing is teaching kids how to read. And almost 60% of our economically disadvantaged kids didn't meet the CASP standards in ELA literacy in the most recent tests. So I think Mr. Collins said earlier, if we're such a good school district, we should be able to educate all of our kids. So we've got to implement the structured literacy plan fully in our classrooms immediately.
Thank you very much. Matt Nagel.
Yeah, the opportunity gap has not been discussed much tonight. My own son, a Mexican-American boy, his Smarter Balanced Assessment scores, they dropped somewhat from 6th grade at my old school in West Marin to 7th grade here in Palo Alto. And the same kind of thing was happening when my daughter was here. When she left, everything was going up. And so we say low income, but we're really talking about our Black and low income and some of our Pacific Islander students. We need to name it, and we need to do a lot less of what we have been doing for the last 50 years, because that hasn't worked. And so I hope to change a mindset from remediation to acceleration.
Thank you very much. Karna Neiswaner.
One of the things we haven't discussed at all tonight is special education and the issues and concerns raised by a lot of those families. Making sure that consistent services are provided across schools, and in particular that they start early. It's not just the high need kids, but it's the kids that need IEPs to make sure that they can read, to make sure that they can do the basic things that they're going to need to do. And what I've seen is an inconsistency in how this is handled across various schools. And that's very concerning to me. And I think we need to hold all of the principals and all of the schools accountable.
Thank you. Katie Causey.
I want students to see themselves after they graduate. I organized alumni for current students when I declared, and I think that's so important for both mental health of getting students that connection, and also giving all of our students a leg up in navigating the job market and their post-high school careers. If elected, I'll be the first member of the LGBT+ community to hold this office, and I really want our students to see themselves in alumni after they graduate.
Thank you. Todd Collins.
Something if you watch board meetings, you may have heard me say before, is that we cannot be a great school district unless we do a great job for our least resourced and most challenged students. And I agree with the comment that focusing on the achievement gap is frankly the #1 priority of the district. And in addition, as Ms. Neiswaner and Ms. I'll just say Jesse, because I need to practice. Said both special education and dyslexia/struggling readers. Those are 2 initiatives that we have been working on, but we have tremendous progress to make. And frankly, I view it as a tremendous opportunity. because those are kids that we are not serving well, that we have it within our grasp to serve. And so a commitment to that is something that is incredibly important for the district.
Thank you, Todd. Jennifer DiBrienza, you get the last word tonight.
Okay, oh, pressure. I think several people have named it. I think equity in our district overall, we talked about it a little bit in the culture and people feeling a part of the community, but the fact that there are students that we are not serving. And we can either look at it as there's something wrong with the kids or there's something wrong with the district. And I lay it all on the district. And whether that's us failing to teach them how to read or whether that's them not feeling a part of our community through systemic policies and practices and culture that we have in our district. So I think looking big picture at our culture and our inclusion across the board.
All right, well, that wraps it up for this evening. I just want to thank all of the candidates so much for your thoughtfulness, for your great responses, and for volunteering to run for the school board. The voters have a lot of great options. They need to choose 3. So best of luck to you in your campaigns as they go forward. I'd also like to thank our student panelists for being with us tonight. Excellent questions, really hopeful for our future based on you guys. So this video will be posted on YouTube. It needs to process for a couple hours, but it'll be there for those who want to go back and listen to any particular answers. That's youtube.com/PA Weekly. All right, thanks all for your time and your attention tonight. We really appreciate it. Best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank
Good night.
everybody for watching.
Thank you.